I call the Creator a singular force, singular power. There's one force, one source, one substance in all the universe. It's similar to the force of Star Wars. It's pre-gender and it's beyond all separation, and therefore it is one. Many of us perceive this as a god and goddess, a mother and father, and I will frequently refer to this force with the pronoun they. And the reason I do that is because the mystery of the infinite is that it's a singular plurality, and that's not something that's easy to comprehend. But they, for me, is a very appropriate pronoun for this singular force that is a mother and father, a god and goddess. It's hard to understand what I'm saying sometimes when I do that, and it does cause some people to have a bit of frustration. But let's look at it this way. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and they were constantly trying to explain to me Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and it never made sense. I couldn't understand. What is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Is there one God, or are there three gods? What is this? And it was very challenging for me because they didn't have a good answer. But once I got into the craft, it all clicked. I said, oh, I get it. Mother, father, child. Well, that's easy. There's one family, there's one unit, there's one power, and it acts through the act of creation as this mother, father, child. God and goddess makes a lot of sense to me. Now, if we were to look at the god and goddess just as an inanimate object for a moment, like a battery or a magnet, if you were to cut the magnet in half, you would get two magnets, and they would each have a positive and negative mother, father pole, male and female pole. If you cut a battery in half, you'd just get a nothing because it would cease to work. But we understand that without these two poles, neither of these things can operate properly. And so that is masculine and feminine, but they are operating as a unit. Now, when we bring that mystical third in, it's whatever we're using the battery for. So, in that regard, God, goddess, child would be positive pole, negative pole, light my flashlight. Positive pole, negative pole, play my radio. Positive pole, negative pole, whatever you're using the battery for. When I got into the craft, all of the theological misunderstandings just made sense. When I moved forward with my craft and started to study the Qabalah and other disciplines, it solidified it even more that there's a mother and a father and a child. And who's this child? It's us. It's us. And that means that we are one with God. And like I say frequently, the only thing that's different between you and God is that God creates you and you don't create it. The battery lights the flashlight up. Without the battery, the flashlight wouldn't work. Without the mother and father, you wouldn't work. But together, you are that mystical Trinity. And therefore, you also are part of God. You are part of divinity. Because who you are is one with that mystical polarity. And so mother, father, child is a singular force, and you're part of it. But we believe the battery is separate from us. We believe that we are different than, separate from the battery, and that we are flailing about all by ourselves. This idea of separation is what we would call a dream. We're dreaming that we're separate from this force. Dreams are constructs. Think about when you dream. When you wake up from a dream, you don't believe that really happened in the physical world anymore. You understand that that was a construct of your mind. Well, the dream that we're dreaming in this world is a similar kind of dream. Dreams lack any true causation. Dreams are as if you are the flashlight separate from the battery. There's no cause and effect. We're dreaming that we are the cause of our own reality, separate from our source. And we are free to do that. We have every right to use our minds that way if we want to. But then what we get is the effects of that. The dream itself isn't true. It's not true, but we believe it's true, so we act as if it's true. The dreamer of a dream is unaware that they're dreaming unless they acquire the skills of lucidity, which is very challenging. Many of us do practice lucid dreaming, but we're a minority when you think about humanity as a whole. The dream that we're dreaming here is a dream that we're unaware of. We are unaware that the illusions that we are interacting with in this world are self-created. We don't understand the power that we have to project meaning onto the screen of space. We don't understand that. We just think things are happening arbitrarily, and we have no idea that we have immense power as that mystical third, as that divine child, to project meaning onto the screen of space. And since we're unaware that we're dreaming things, when we project meaning onto the screen of space, we reinforce the dream. And then these illusions that we have, whatever they are, happy, sad, sick, healthy, rich, poor, safe, unsafe. The whole idea of fear itself arises from not recognizing our power as projectors of meaning onto the screen of space. We have no clue our role in the whole process. And so we're afraid that the things of this dream are powerful and that they have power over us. And then we have experiences to prove that's true. Anybody that believes the world has power over them doesn't just come up with that idea out of nowhere. They have proof. They've had experiences of it. They know that this is true, and everybody else knows that this is true, and so everybody else conspires unknowingly to reinforce these illusions. And very infrequently does anybody say, maybe that's not really what's happening. Maybe we're responsible for this dream ourselves, and it just seems like we're at the effect of the world. And usually when somebody comes along and says that, they're either ridiculed, assassinated, or sometimes revered. Either way, it's all still part of the illusion. It's still all part of the dream, because the dreamer always sees themselves as the victim of the dream, not the originator of the dream. Now, when people hear this, the ego mind starts to do more of the same in regards to this. They either start to blame themselves for their problems and say, look at the horrible reality I created for myself. They get a disease. They say, why did I create this reality for myself? Or they hear this and they react violently against it and saying, you're blaming the victim. Nobody created this. Nobody wanted this. Nobody asked for this. Babies didn't ask to be born in poverty or deformed or diseased. I didn't ask to be raped. I didn't create this reality for myself. That's just the ego's constant litany to try to distract us from where our power is. The idea of blame in and of itself is the dream, is the problem. Because whatever we project onto the screen of space is what we interact with. So when we project blame onto the screen of space, we get the effects of that. We live in a fearful world. When we project anything onto the screen of space and interact with it as if it was real, we get the effects of that. No matter what the illusions are that we project onto the screen of space that we're interacting with, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they're happy, they're sad, whether they make us feel more like victims or they make us feel more like victors, it's all there to reinforce our sleeping state. Our sleeping state, that we are different than our creator, or even that there is no creator, and that we created everything. We created ourselves. To say I created myself is a very different experience than I'm projecting illusions onto the screen of space. I'm misusing my power. To believe that I created myself is a very fearful thought, because that means I truly am alone in the universe. I truly am responsible for everything. When in reality, when we wake up from the dream, we recognize we're not responsible for any of it. Because on one hand, we're not responsible for the dream because it didn't happen. And on the other hand, we're not responsible for our lives because we didn't create ourselves. The only thing we're responsible for is how we use our minds. And therefore, when we are going through things in the world that require healing, whether it is being the victim of a rape, being the victim of brutality, being the victim of a disease, being the victim of poverty, all of those things, the ego, if it gets the idea that we're projecting these things onto the screen of space, it will say, why'd you do that? You're so bad. Why did you create all of these problems for yourself? The better question to ask is, how can my mind be healed? How can my mind be healed? And when you start to understand, the only thing that needs to happen is that our minds be healed so that we stop doing these things. We stop misusing our minds. Then the responsibility is taken off our shoulders. We don't have to know how to do it. We aren't the ones to blame because nobody's to blame. How do you blame somebody for something that never really happened? In the dream, of course, it happens, but in reality, it didn't happen. In reality, you were dreaming. In reality, you were experiencing a nightmare. So yeah, on one hand, you could say you were responsible for the images in your nightmare because you were misusing your mind, but only because you didn't know any better, only because you fell asleep. And that's that whole mystery of the demiurge. The whole mystery of giving us freedom of thought before we understood how to use our minds creates this matrix of cause and effect relationships that are meaningless, so that we live in a fearful world and that we believe that we're victims of this world and there's no way out. That's the misinterpretation. That's a misperception of the whole idea of cause and effect. Because the idea of cause and effect has been flipped in our minds. That's how the separation occurred. The idea that we could possibly deprive our Creator of our existence, of our relationship with them. We imagine that we created ourselves on some level and that we've reversed the laws of cause and effect. We're the cause of our own world. We're the cause of everything. When in reality, we're the effect. We're the child. We're the divine child. And ultimately, if you just think about it logically, say the mother, father, positive, negative pole on that battery, creates you, extends itself as you through love. If you were allowed to just continue in that same line of creation, it makes sense that your role would be to be a creator in your own right. What species in the world is born that's unlike its parents? If two dogs get together and have puppies, those puppies are very much like their parents. They are dogs. They're not fish. So when the infinite creates you as a soul, you're created just like the Creator, which means you have powers of creation and you're supposed to create. But when we start to believe that we're separate from our Creator, our ability to create doesn't go away. It just gets thwarted. It just gets misused. It just gets used in ways that cause us problems. So the healing of all of that is through awakening from the dream. Makes sense, doesn't it? If the problem is that you're sleeping and having a nightmare, the best thing to do is wake up and realize that it's not really happening. Awakening itself undoes the confusion between cause and effect that we've created for ourselves. It shows the dreamer that they're the source of the dream and all the fear that we're experiencing. And it shows us that the fear that we're experiencing isn't causative. It doesn't really have any effects other than within the realm of the nightmare itself. Because fear doesn't exist because it's not the will of a loving Creator. Fear only exists within our miscreation. So awakening from the dream starts to reveal to us the mind that created our world didn't create the mind. Our mind is powerful and it has the ability to create any way it wants to. We've been given that freedom. But we didn't create the mind that's doing that. We didn't create that. What we created was things out of the mind. We used our mind, but the mind was created for us because we're an extension of that mind. The purpose of waking up is to offer ourselves the alternative to the dreams that we're experiencing. When we awaken from dreams, we no longer are at the effect of the pain, the suffering, the guilt, etc. of the dream, because when we wake up from a dream, those illusions disappear. Think about the last time you had a horrible nightmare and you woke up. It might have taken you some time to recognize that it was a dream, but eventually you got it. You woke up and you're like, oh, thank goodness that wasn't real. Well, the same thing is going to happen to you when you wake up from this dream, and to me and to all of us. So the process of awakening begins when the dreamer recognizes that they're dreaming and recognizes their own role in the creation or the projection of fear. And the fear itself is unraveled by seeing that it has no real effects. Only within the realm of a nightmare does that fear have any effects. The mind then, when it awakens, becomes free to make choices that are outside of the illusions, that are not reactions to the images within the dream or the nightmare. When you realize that you're dreaming, you then are able to use your mind constructively and make choices about what you want to think, how you want to perceive things. Whereas if you're dreaming, you're just reacting to the images in your dream, which, by the way, doesn't make you a bad person. That's part of the whole ego. If you start to catch on to the ego's game, then the ego tries to use its own game against you by saying, why are you so stupid? Why'd you let this happen? Why are you creating illusions for yourself? Why are you living in a fearful world? What an idiot. Right? So when that kind of stuff happens, recognize it for what it is. That's not the will of a loving creator for you to feel worse about yourself. The will of a loving creator is for you to gently awaken from it and recognize that everything is beautiful and that you didn't do anything wrong. You're not a sinner. You didn't do anything except for fall asleep. And that's not a sin. It was just a misuse of your mind. And how did you do that? Because you fell in line with the matrix. You fell in line with this whole idea, this one simple idea that you're separate from your creator, that you're all by yourself, and that we're a bunch of all by ourselves people that have to either learn how to get along or fight each other for the limited resources in this world. That separation matrix becomes unraveled when you wake up, and the world's dreams start to disappear for you. And the body and the world outside of us are then seen as neither good nor bad, neutral things on the screen of space that can have any function that we desire. And when we ask a higher power within us, that higher intelligence within us, to show us the real purposes of our body, the real purposes of the world, the highest purpose of anything within the screen of space, then we are taught how to use our minds in a different way, and we can start to choose how we project things onto the screen of space so that they start to reflect the truth of who we are rather than just going along with the matrix. When we accept responsibility for the dream that we're having and stop projecting blame outward onto the world, we start experiencing a different world. And we do that not by making ourselves feel bad that we're somehow responsible, but recognize that we picked up a bad habit along the way and we didn't even know. We didn't even know. Nobody told us. When you were a kid, nobody said, now be careful how you use your mind, because if you project fearful thoughts upon the screen of space, you will interact with them like they are real and you will have a difficult life. Nobody says that to you. We just do it. We pick it all up. Everybody learns everything telepathically. So there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything bad. And that's the whole message of rising on that serpent path on the tree of life, is that you didn't do anything bad. You're just unlearning a lot of mental habits that you picked up along the way. So in that way, you actually were victimized. You were victimized by a bad thought. So as you climb those paths on the tree of life, you recognize that there's a lot going on beneath the surface automatically in your mind that is creating an experience for you that you don't want. And when you recognize it for what it is, you stop doing it. You just stop. When you recognize it, you don't want to do it anymore. You know, if you recognize when I bang my head against the wall like that, it ends up hurting, Once you realize that you're banging your head against the wall and that's causing you the pain, you say, oh, maybe I won't bang my head against the wall anymore and I'll feel better. It's the same kind of thing when we rise up the tree. We realize that there's so many different ways that we were misusing our minds that were causing us to reinforce this illusion and reinforce our sleeping state, that we can choose differently, no longer have those experiences for ourselves. It's a process. We start to learn how to embrace our awakening as an opportunity to learn and to heal. And we start to see people outside of us not as enemies. Remember how we talked at the beginning of the talk that there's mother, father, child, and you're the child. So is everybody else. And when you see that, when you start to see that, and you see that everybody's that, and that if they're not acting like that, they're really stuck in their dream. They're really stuck in their dream. And so even if you do have to put the brakes on certain relationships or put boundaries on certain behavior, you start to do it with a loving idea. You recognize it's not that they're your enemy, it's that they're sick. The same disease that you were a part of before you started awakening out of it. And you can have a lot more compassion and patience for them as a result of that. And even though people still might bug you and still might annoy you and still might be people that you need to protect yourself from, you're not doing it with the same misunderstandings. You're seeing them as one with you. Not even as a brother or sister, but as a part of the divine child of the entire universe. And then we start to accept all of the world as we awaken. As we awaken, we start to accept all of what we perceive as an external world as neutral, as just the screen of space that can be anything. And that starts to free our mind from the thoughts which habitually project suffering and blame and guilt and hatred and violence onto the world. We start to become free of that more and more. So to try to explain to those of you that misunderstand why I am both speaking of divinity as a singular force and as a multiplicity, it is that way. We do have a mother. We do have a father. We are the child. And within that, there's only one. There's one battery. There's one battery, a positive and a negative and a function. That's the Holy Trinity, is mother, father, function, mother, father, child. And you are the function. You are the function. You are the extension of that love, and it never ends. And you have the freedom to use your mind any way you want, but we don't realize how we're using our minds. And most of us, once we realize how we're using our minds, we want to choose to use them a different way so that we don't keep miscreating in the same way that we have been and that everybody else around us is miscreating. And we no longer blame them for that because we realize they're asleep. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's all that means. They're just asleep. They're asleep. They don't know any better. They are in the throes of a bad nightmare. When you see people in the throes of a bad nightmare, annoying as their fits and starts might be, you recognize it for what it is, rather than wanting to annihilate them or kill them or blame them, right? You start wanting to have compassion for them. But that can't happen until you start awakening, because otherwise you're just part of the dream going against another part of the dream. So the awakening has to be our goal. And the way we do that is going to be very different for everybody. But that's why we say it's so important for us, each and every one of us, to sit in silence a little bit every day so that we can be introduced to that inner guide, that inner teacher who can help us in the present moment. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be. Blessed be.